Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for Tap into the Chicago River. We are coming to you virtually to share some updates about what Shedd Aquarium and Urban Rivers is working on this summer on the Wild Mile of the Chicago River. We have been working together for the last few years to rewild the river, or at least this portion of the river. And so we are working to make it more wildlife friendly and also make it a cool destination for nature nerds and kayakers and folks to explore and get kind of a nature in the city experience. So we have a few speakers tonight who are going to be sharing updates with you. So we're going to kind of keep it fast moving. We are also going to transport you out to the Chicago River for a portion of this event. And so even though a lot of us are kind of stuck inside at home, maybe the window's open at least, mine is, it's nice out tonight. We're going to do a little field trip of the Wild Mile and get to see what's going on out there tonight. So it should be fun. We are going to leave lots of time at the end for Q&A. And so if you have any questions throughout the event, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I'm going to be kind of moderating between our different speakers, as well as keeping an eye on that chat box. So if you have questions and it seems like we can answer them as we go, I'll be sure to raise them with our speakers. And then we'll also have time for the Q&A at the end. So just to introduce you to who our speakers are today, and you may be able to see their screens, but we'll get them featured when it's their time to speak. Ellie is the Director of Programming at Urban Rivers. She's going to be kicking us off in just a minute. I'm going to be speaking second. I am the Director of Conservation Action at Shedd Aquarium. Following me is going to be Phil Nicodemus, who is the Director of Research with Urban Rivers. Waving in the back there if you happen to see his screen. And then the last presenter will be Austin Happel, who is a research biologist at Shedd Aquarium. So you're kind of alternating between Urban Rivers and Shedd spokespeople. And then again, you'll get to see the river itself and interact with some folks out there too. It's a little teaser, so we'll see how that goes. Should be fun. Okay, so again, just a reminder that if you do have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat box. And we are glad to have you here today. And I'm going to be passing the mic over to Ellie to get us started.
Great, thanks Jacqueline. Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first virtual Tap into the Chicago River. So I'm going to start with a quick Wild Mile update and share some slides with you. The Chicago River and our nation's urban rivers have been heavily used for shipping and transportation. It's what defines some of the most profound cities in the world, and its industrial legacy has left a lasting footprint on one of our most cherished features, our rivers. At this point in time, we have the opportunity to repurpose this industrial relic as a catalyst for bringing wildlife back into the heart of our community. Our vision began with a small 5-foot by 10-foot raft. From these humble beginnings, our team began to think outside of the box and understand what is possible, to see a vision of what a river can be. One of our core principles for the Wild Mile is a wildlife first approach, where we design spaces focusing on the wildlife that was once there and currently existing. Then, how can we connect design and the community with the ecology of the local environment? This is an essential approach to making a beautiful destination for visitors. We currently have installed many floating gardens with native plants, which previously were only accessible by boat or kayak. Later this summer, we're putting in 6,000 native plants, over 200 additional floating gardens, and 300 feet of floating pathway. This is a render of the phase 1 of the Wild Mile, which we are happy to say is going in this summer. In a large and complex environment like Chicago, the Wild Mile showcases how prairies, forests, rivers, wetlands, and lakes all coexist, and how we can push ideas to the top and make a change that can disrupt the norms of our perspectives. So what's next for the Wild Mile? The Wild Mile's vision is strengthen neighborhood connectivity, generate cleaner water, and support more vibrant ecosystems along Chicago's North Branch Canal is coming to life this summer. We are happy to announce we'll be starting our River Ranger program next month. Thank you all for being so patient as we figure out how to engage our volunteers and keep everybody safe. You can sign up and find out more information on our website. We should have a calendar of volunteers up in the next week or so. Learn more about the future of the project, the importance of environmental action and ecological restoration along Chicago's rivers, and ways to get involved by visiting our website, urbanriv.org or wildmile.org. Great. Okay, great. So those are just a few updates from for what's happening this season with our project. We previously weren't aware if we were going to be able to install this, but we're thrilled to announce that we're going to be able to engage our volunteers and hopefully get our ranger program started in the next week or so. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellie, for that overview and some of those amazing pictures. I'm going to jump in next to talk a little bit about what brings shad out to the river. So I'm sharing my screen. I actually think a couple previous shad folks are on this in the audience, so it's great to have you guys, including Maggie and Hillary, who are here at our last build day. But one of the things that shad has been doing with rivers is helping to build and install this in-stream habitat. And so this is from our installation day last year, hence no masks and looking like normal people. But we have installed sections of Shad's River Island over the last couple of years in close partnership with the awesome experts of Urban Rivers. They help us to select and purchase a wide variety of different plants to install floating islands. And they also help us figure out a great configuration so that we can get variation in habitat installed in the river. And so we've done installations the last 2 summers. This year we're doing another installation, and what's really exciting is what Allie was mentioning, that there's going to be a walkway as well. So previously, for those of us who've been out to this space, we know that the wall is a barrier for people, and if you want to view the Wild Mile while you're on foot, you have to look over the side of the river, over the railing by Whole Foods or some other businesses over there in Lincoln Park, and you have to look way down to the Wild Mile. It's kind of hard to actually see what's growing there, what kind of plant wildlife is there. So it's just really exciting to have the walkway as part of the plan for this year. Definitely looking forward to our build, which we're expecting, I believe, in August at this point. We have also been kicking off, well, we kicked off last week our Kayak for Conservation program. So this is a public outreach program and also an opportunity for people to help learn about and steward the Chicago River and specifically the Wild Mile. So we started this program last week. We are offering different sessions on most days of the week and at different times, and also different types of levels of paddle experience or like citizen science experience. So we're excited to be in our 3rd year of this program, and I wanted to share a few things that are new for 2020. First, we are doing a little experiment with a pay-what-you-can registration model. We wanted to do this for one, so that we could both offer a more accessible price option at that $20 level, and also offer, to folks who wanted to pay at a higher level to help support the conservation work and the animal care that Shed does. We have been closed the last few months, and so that has really taken a big hit on Shed's budget, and we have been doing some additional fundraising to help cover our costs. And so this is kind of one of those small ways to do that by offering that higher price point. This year, we're also offering private group and family sessions. We've had a lot of people take us up on that. It's a great option, especially if you do just want to, bring a group of your friends and family who you may not be seeing a lot of these days, as a lot of us are spending time at home. So when you are in a kayak, it's kind of a great way for automatically socially distancing as you have your kayak and your paddle around you. But the private group sessions just make it easy for you to just bring your crew out with you. And then lastly, we added another session called River Discovery Tour. And that's in addition to a couple other programs called River Monitors and River Explorers. And those other sessions are a little bit more involved as far as the types of stewardship activities that folks are doing. So the River Discovery Tour is a little bit shorter, it's an hour and a half, and it's really a chance to just get introduced to the river and introduced to paddling in the space. So it's a fun starter paddle. Also new this year are masks. And so just wanted to take note, and Ellie had mentioned this too, we're figuring out new protocols, new safety measures. We are sanitizing the life jackets, the paddles, the kayaks in partnership with Kayak Chicago, which is the outfitter. And masks are required on land, but what's nice with the city guideline is that once you're out on the water and you're spaced out, you can take the mask off. So again, it's a really nice way to be active and be out with people. But it's nice to not have to wear that mask the whole time, especially on some of the warmer days. So again, Kayak for Conservation kicked off last week. It's been really fun to have people out with us, and we're going to be running the program through September. So I hope that a lot of you guys can join us during that time. With Kayak Chicago also, or sorry, with Kayak for Conservation, one of the things that we have beefed up this year, and we actually have one of our partners from Loyola as part of our audience here today, but we are beefing up our protocol for doing litter collection and also data collection about that litter. So we're partnering with Loyola University, Friends of the Chicago River, and a number of other organizations to get to better understand the litter that we're finding in the river so that we can try to prevent it. For those of you who are familiar with the Alliance for the Great Lakes, they have many years of robust data about beach cleanup data around the Great Lakes region, and that helps to inform policy change. So we are hoping to do something similar with the Chicago River. We are also, through the program, doing ongoing scientific research, so some wildlife monitoring, invertebrate monitoring, and beyond just the sort of more basic citizen science that we're doing as part of Kayak for Conservation. I'm going to be handing it off here in a minute to both Phil from Urban Rivers and Austin from Shed, who do much more robust scientific research. But it's really great to have this interplay between citizen science doing constant monitoring and just having a presence out there, getting to see what is out there, helping us better understand the impact of the islands on the river ecosystem. And it's nice to pair that citizen science with the deeper scientific research studies that are going on. So I think that's it. I'm going to have that Q&A slide up later. Just wanted to make sure that was all I have. So I am going to be passing it over to Phil, who is going to give a deeper dive into the different research projects happening in the Wild Mile.
That's right. And boy, what fun projects they are. You don't always get to say these research projects are so very wonderful. But yes, thank you for that, Jacqueline. Just a couple things about what make the Chicago River a kind of unique river system. I guess not so unique in that cities around the world have been doing these to the rivers for centuries now, but the big issues that we find are all the ways that we make a river useful for ourselves, which makes it not as useful for fish and wildlife and other sorts of things. So if you look here, what we have is a comparison of one of the big things that we've done to the river, which is de-meandering it or channelizing it. So basically, if you look on the left, what you see is that we have the normal course of the river come from north to south, take a big bend, and then go around that little island and head straight back down south. And one of the things that we've done to this river course over the history is taken out those curves and make them into straightaways, which is good for barges, it's good for shipping, but it's not necessarily good for animals that look for variation in order to fit more of them within a certain area. So in order to maximize diversity, you need a lot of different characteristics in an environment versus just having a big straight box to push goods and water through, which is kind of what we've designed this river to be over the last century or so. So a normal ecosystem would have kind of all these different interactions, and what you can notice here is that it isn't just one thing kind of being benefited, it is all of these things working in concert with one another that make an ecosystem healthy and very productive. So on the edges, you'll tend to have plants that can come right up to the riverbank. Those have two kind of big functions, one of which is to attract things to the riverbank itself, but then another would be to hold on to the soil and prevent erosion in some ways. So even though you do have meandering rivers, a lot of them are more or less held into place by what forms around them. And so when we have channelized these things, we've taken away the ability for a lot of these things to exist. So for instance, one of the things that the river managers do in the area is to remove logs like this, which are underwater habitat. The bottom is not so clean and varied as it normally is. It's filled with sediment. We have a lot of different birds that'll hang out in these different niches on the sides and interact with everything else. But basically, these ecosystems, as they are supposed to function, are supposed to be varied. They're supposed to be very wide scale. They're supposed to benefit a lot of things. And what we've done is say anything that can exist here has to obey by the rules that we're setting out for it, which is it has to be easy for shipping. And so that's kind of some of the things that we're hoping to correct when we are putting in these artificial habitats. Here's just an example of the fact that these plants that we're putting in are actually thriving. They really don't have many health issues when we put them out there. If they can deal with water, if they can deal with constant wetness, they're able to grow very quickly because there is a whole lot of nutrients that are in the water itself, and a lot of the other plants' requirements are taken care of. You can see just within 1 year, the amount of growth that we've had just a year apart. You know, a lot of these, some of these are weeds, a lot of these are still natives though. So we tried to plant, especially initially, we got about 50 or 60 native wetland and prairie plants to Illinois. Now we probably have about 20 or 25 just because we were doing a lot of experimenting, and now it's kind of shaken out to the plants that really, really like being in this kind of environment, which happen to be a lot of sedges, a lot of rhizonomously spreading species, which mean that their roots are what are spreading the bulk of these plants. So, and some of these species, as we'll see in a second, actually have a majority of their biomass be stored in their roots rather than the above ground things that you normally see. This is a blank screen. No, there we go. Filling in. There it is. Does anybody feel like we're in the 90s right now? Slowly, slowly. So these are some mesocosm islands that I've we've had at the Botanic Garden, Chicago Botanic Garden, for a while. Basically, this is just river water pumped into large tanks where we can look at what happens to the plants when they're not exposed to all the things that our river is exposed to. So this is as close as we can get to just how these plants would interact normally with the water itself without having to deal with all the wave action that we see out here, with all the periodic rise and fall in river levels and currents. And so what we see the big differences are is that a few more species can actually survive when we take them out of the river situation, probably mostly because there is a lot of wave action. So some of these things, some of these plants, even though they are there, maybe aren't as healthy as they can be, but that's it's part of the trial and error process. So we can figure out better ways to protect some of these plants if we really want to start to see them on our islands more and more. To the right, we have some kind of cultivar of the foxglove beard tongue. So that's a good native Illinois species, but these flowers are very purple. So what we kind of think has happened is that the Botanic Garden has nativar tests, which means they're crossing what you would find in the wild with a cultivar species, which is what you'd buy from a flower shop or something. And so we kind of think that this is sort of hybridized and ended up on our islands because we are right next to their test plot. So there's definitely a very big willingness for a lot of these plants to hop onto these islands, and it really just depends on their own biology as to whether or not they're actually going to thrive. Another thing that I work on is the microbial situation in the water itself. Microbes are a very, very important part of this ecosystem, and especially when people are talking about improving the water quality. Most of the time people attribute that to plants, but in reality it's the microbes who are associated with the roots of the plants that are doing a lot of that filtration work, which can mean a lot of different things. One of the things that we do is I take a water sample and I inoculate these wells, and each one of these wells has a different type of carbon substrate in it, so a different type of thing that microbes can break down. And if you have a microbial community that is going to turn something purple, that means it's using that substrate. So you can tell the difference between certain communities based on how many wells they turn purple and how purple those wells turn. So just an interesting way to tell if our islands versus a other part of the canal is having a very large difference on the microbial communities that live there. A lot of the AFWs are adding a whole lot of underwater substrates. So on the left, you see one of our islands that we've pulled out of the mesocosm tanks, and you'll see all that root growth that's down underneath. This is, some species are getting down to probably 2 or 3 feet in length of root growth. Some of these other species are very, very fine and small. And it's not really surprising that the ones that are doing well on our islands are the ones that are growing the big, thick roots, and the ones that are not doing so well are the ones that have very delicate root systems. On the right, you'll see our these are infield wetlands. So this is us sticking a GoPro underneath our islands. You'll see not only these big deep root spikes, but you'll see all the algae that is coated on around these, which is also a huge source of food for a lot of different fish, but it also provides some habitat and some ability to block the current that comes ripping down the canal when there are a lot of high water events, and like this year where we're dumping a lot of water from the Great Lakes down the river. This is gonna load slow apparently too, which is completely fine. And then other partnerships that we have that we've been working with, to the right, you'll see our the Illinois State graduate student who is now done with his work. He is close to publishing his thesis. He was doing heavy metal testing. So he was looking at different parts from the upstream to the downstream portion of our main islands and seeing if there is an uptake of heavy metals as they pass through our gardens. And we're not 100% certain what the results are yet, but it does seem like at least a couple of things during the growing season may have been removed from the water, at least as we're testing it. On the left, we have an MWRD boat. The MWRD is the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. They do a lot of good work for us. They're out there every day kind of monitoring biology and things like that. So they're looking at fish shocking, and they do a lot of the Hester Dendy sampling and gathering for macroinvertebrates. So these are all just pieces of the ecosystem that we'd like to know more about. We'd like to figure out if they are changing our situation in the canal as we're adding more and more of these islands. And I believe that is it for me. It's a good chance to send it off over to Austin now, if you are ready.
Actually, Phil, if I could interrupt real quick, could you talk about research? Did you already mention that?
I'm sorry?
Did you mention mussel research? Because Ellie show off the mussel.
Yeah, it looks like she is just getting there right now. Okay, yes, so the mussels, I'm gonna stop screen sharing here and let Allie share. So Allie right now is at the mussel habitats, and if you can see what she's up to, she's pulling off the lid there. So these are just 5-gallon buckets. They've got an aerator unit inside of them. They're just floating on the top of the water. And there is a mussel that is a giant floater. They're all the same species. These are mussels that have a good ability of tolerance for poor water quality, which is not necessarily the Chicago River anymore, but this is the vast majority of the mussels that you'll find naturally in the Chicago River. So we want to make sure that we have them represented in our canal. Our canal is very silty. Right now in those buckets, they are sitting on a bunch of sand, which is what they like. So normally we have all this silt that comes in that's broken down organic material that would cover up this sand, which they normally like to hang out in. So this is a way to keep them interacting with the water body without having them get covered up by a bunch of gunk. So yeah, Allie's kind of showing you these guys. These can live to be, these particular mussels, where some mussels can live for 30 or 35 years, these ones grow fast and die young. They're kind of the party mussels, so they'll get really big really quickly, and they last for maybe about 10 years, the oldest ones. They look good.
I was trying to get one of the mussels with its tongue sticking out, but I couldn't find.
Yeah, they're pretty quick to avoid.
They're shy. They're shy today. Awesome. Phil, thank you for that update. And Ellie, thank you for taking us out for a little trip to the river. And we are going to be handing it over to Austin, but we'll be back out on the river in a little bit.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Ellie. All right, so Austin is going to talk about baby fish in Chicago. So off to Austin, our research biologist at Shedd Aquarium.
All right, yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Austin Happel. I'm a biologist with the Shedd Aquarium. I'm focused on urban freshwater systems. The project that I have been tackling over the past about year and a half is trying to look at what fish are spawning in Chicago and where are they spawning. And as this image on the screen sort of alludes to, my work is done at night. So I go out at night with these contraptions. They're little traps that we use to collect baby fish. And what we do is we actually go out and we crack a glow stick and we put it in the center of these traps, and the larval fish or the baby fish swim into the trap. They're attracted to the light, much like a moth is attracted to a lamp or a candle. The baby fish will swim in there, and then the trap is built in a way that they have trouble getting back out. And so about an hour after I crack the glow stick, I can come back and lift the trap up and see what babies I caught and how many, and then try to look at how does that catch differ based on where I am in the river. If I can get my mouse to work here. So you might ask why? Why am I looking at larval fish and baby fish? Well, one of the main reasons is that for every adult fish, there's about 1,000, if not millions of babies. And so it's actually easier to catch if a species is in an area using larval fish sampling. MWRD will go out, that's the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, and the Illinois DNR, which is the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, will go out and sample, but they'll typically sample for adults. And sampling for adults, you're trying to catch one of like 15 that are maybe in a 1 to 2 mile stretch, whereas I'm trying to just get a couple of 1,000 that are in that stretch. So I can find species that traditional sampling might miss. The other thing is that it can indicate that species are in a pretty good condition as far as meeting all the needs for their life. So they're finding food and they're happy with the amount of food they're getting. They're finding shelter so that they can withstand any sort of environmental threat. So if the water gets really hot or the water gets really cold or there's pollution, they're finding friends. You can't mate without at least another. And then they're finding some sort of spawning habitat. So they're spawning on some sort of substrate. And so that's where it kind of links in with what we're talking about with the Wild Mile, is that they're building this floating eco park using these artificial floating wetlands. And these have been developed in wastewater treatment and pollution sort of ponds to help abate those, make them prettier too. But people haven't really looked at a lot of how they could help organisms outside of that setting. And so these guys have been putting in, these guys being Urban Rivers, have been putting in these floating wetlands. And so I'm going out there and trying to see how do they help with fish along with some of the other partners that Phil mentioned. So last year I sampled throughout the year. I started sampling in May and stopped sampling in September. Throughout the year at the Wild Mile, I caught about 150 larval fish. And so far we've identified, this says 10 species, it's really 11 species. These are the 10 species we've identified using genetics. And then there's a 11th one that I can just look at and say, that's abandoned killifish. But these are some photos of all those fish. So we have some really interesting species in that we found a white sucker there last year. White suckers aren't usually considered a very tolerant species. So that means that they're able to live in the area, which speaks to how good the water quality is. A lot of these other ones speak to the opposite. So goldfish, common carp, and blunt-nosed minnow can live in almost any sort of water condition. But the fact that they're spawning there means that they're doing well and their populations are happy. And then we're also finding things like bluegill and a couple various types of shiners that are really good forage fish for sport fish. So hopefully if we get good populations of those and those populations keep doing well, we can start getting larger and more numerous bass or panfish that people actually want to catch and eat. So then the last thing I wanted to share is that I am currently going out to the islands about once a week to look at some water quality monitoring. I'm going out and looking at dissolved oxygen, which is something we use as a proxy for how healthy and how good water quality is for fish. But while I was out there the other week, I took these photos, and these are photos of the sides of the islands, and all these little white specks that you see on the algae growing on there are actually eggs. So the islands are currently covered in eggs. The way that those eggs are scattered throughout and how numerous they are makes me pretty confident that they're common carp eggs. A lot of other species will kind of lay them in a bunch somewhere and won't really just like haphazardly scatter them everywhere. But it's kind of cool that fish are using this as spawning habitat. Even if they are common carp, we can maybe start thinking that other species are also using it, considering we found all those larval fish species last year. I haven't been able to get out quite yet this year, the same as I did last year due to some of the COVID restrictions, but I'm hoping later in the year, in July, so really starting next week, that I can get out there and start comparing catches. Like I said, I use these glow sticks as kind of the standard to catch larval fish in those traps, but glow sticks create a lot of waste. They're made out of plastic. The chemicals in them are who knows what, even though they say non-toxic on them. So I'm trying to see what do I catch using these glow sticks and how does that compare to something that's reusable like an LED light source. And so I'm hoping I can do that this year in July. So hopefully we can have those updates at the end of this year or at the same time next year when we do this again. But if you get to go out there, look at really close at the islands and see if you see any eggs if you go out there soon. I'll head it back over to Jacqueline. I think they're going to show you some of the islands up close.
Yeah, thank you, Austin. I am going to be passing it over to Ellie, who is outside in the Wild Mile, coming to you live, all news anchor style. And yeah, I'll hand it over to her.
All right, here we are out on the Wild Mile. And let me just go ahead and flip this around. Okay, so here are our floating gardens filled with native plants that we have attached to the seawall outside of Whole Foods. Everything looks so green and lush. And we ran into Jackie.
Hi.
Jackie, what are you doing out there today?
We're out here for a tour right now. Got 10 of us out on the river. We're learning all about the Wild Mile. And then we got Maggie over here. She's prepping our fish traps for tomorrow morning. We're going to be out here fish monitoring.
That's cool. What kind of fish are you monitoring?
Any fish that are using the Wild Mile. Specifically, we're looking at the what type of fish are using the island versus the more natural shoreline across the way, and then a dock further up the channel. So we're really trying to gauge how well those three habitats are for fish, and see, you know, are the islands that are serving fish populations the way we're hoping. But this week we found, saw sucker, we saw bluegill, and catfish.
Awesome. Any turtles today?
Yeah, so it's a nice sunny day, so lots of turtles. We've got painted turtles out here. There's a map turtle further down the Wild Mile. We've got a big snapper all the way down at the Division Street.
Awesome. Awesome. It's great to be out. It's great to be out here on this beautiful day. So I'm going to show you right now. We've got these islands that are installed to the seawall. Some of these are going to be transferred over across the way on the waste management seawall, directly across from us. And then this whole stretch that you see in front of us now will be built further out into the canal. Oh, we got a bunch of kayakers coming. Will be built further out into the canal with floating pathway. So what was previously only accessible by kayak and boat, this summer you'll be able to walk down. Hopefully by the end of August that will be installed. So the dock where I was showing you the mussels before will be the entrance point. That's right behind REI, the new REI store on Eastman Street. If you walk down to the river, there's an access point, and our floating pathway will connect to the REI dock that is there now. I've seen a lot of kayakers out here since things have been slowly starting to open up in Chicago. It's nice to see everybody. Hello. So also,
Ellie, can I ask a quick question?
yeah.
And this is for either you or Phil, but do you guys know what types of plants are going to be planted this year? Is it going to be more of the same so that they can kind of get established, or are you trying anything different?
Yeah, we try out a lot of different things. The bulk of what we're going to put in, just because we know it's going to succeed, and that's kind of the biggest part in adding the habitat, is making sure that there's plants up there. Those are a lot of the sedges and rushes, so carex and juncus and things like that. Hibiscus mosquitoes, which is the rose mallow. We have that spreading all over the place, which is really good. We like blue flag iris. That's one that's out there, but is very vulnerable to ducks and geese. So that's been kind of a problem, and we'd like to see more of that. In terms of, what's it? Queen of the Prairie, Filipendula rubra. One of the co-founders is here whispering in my ear gently.
Hi.
We've got a lot of milkweed out there, which we always like to keep around, even if it doesn't necessarily, it isn't the most hardy, but we've actually found spots where we can make it work. Again, the foxglove beard tongue is one of the ones that are very cool looking. Chelone glabra, which is turtlehead, all kinds of stuff that we might not have been able to support as easily before. Now that we've got a wider volunteer base and we have an ability to get out and weed more often, some of these more sensitive and pickier species, we think we can really start to get better numbers out there for, besides just all the bread and butter plants that we have out there right now.
Phil, you tapped into another question that I've been holding on to, but somebody asked earlier as far as what exactly the river rangers do. So Ellie, maybe that's something that you can speak to, since I think you oversee the river rangers.
Yeah, so this year, to start off with, starting next week, and a task that is always really important is a trash collection. So a couple days ago, we just got 2 kayaks in our new office, which is right on the Wild Mile. So we're planning to have volunteers come out and start with daily trash collection. A lot of trash gets stuck in these little nooks and crannies. If you can see right back in there, the trash will collect back there, and we just want to keep the river walk and our gardens nice and clean. And we don't have a confirmed install date for this next phase that's going in, but in the next 3 weeks we'll have other tasks such as like maintenance, de-weeding. As you can see on the edges right here, we've got a lot of jewelweed that's come in. We like to keep the islands clean of invasive species because they will just take over and not allow the things that we, Peter and Phil, mostly have carefully picked to grow if we don't maintain the weeds. So we'll have some weeding days, and then once we have a shipment date for all the plants and the gardens coming in, we'll be able to schedule rangers to come and help us with planting in the gardens and bringing them down to the river to be installed.
Ellie, this might be a question that any of us can answer, or you could toss it to Jackie too. For people who haven't kayaked in this part of the Wild Mile, like what makes it special? And is it hard to kayak? Is the water flowing quickly, or what's that experience like?
Oh, sure. So kayaking in this part of the river for me is really amazing, just because the water is pretty shallow and the current isn't very strong. So you get to be surrounded by nature in the middle of the city. But I'll bring that question out to Jackie. What's so special? What do you find special about kayaking in this part of the river?
Well, this part of the river particularly, I mean, you have the nature, but you also have the juxtaposition of the industrial, which I always find really interesting. But I always say that the river is the quickest way to get out of the city. Like, I get out here and I feel like I'm away.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Ellie, it was a little bit hard to hear Jackie. I think what she was saying is like getting on the river is the fastest way to get out of the city. Is that what she said?
Yeah. Fastest way to get out of the city, and you don't even realize, you're in the middle of the industrial corridor right here, and it's just incredibly quiet. You have the background noise of waste management and some of the bridges, but otherwise it's really peaceful.
And I always like that juxtaposition of nature against our urban city. It's got a cool deal to it. Louder, okay. Yeah, I love that juxtaposition of nature against the city, and you really get that out here. It's a unique space. It's also, you see more wildlife out here than you see anywhere else in the city, and wildlife that you don't, if you do see wildlife in the city, you don't see it anywhere but along the river, like the herons, the waterfowl in general, the turtles. We saw beaver out here last week.
Beware of those beavers. Those beavers ate away at our trees that we installed last year. No, they're welcome. But.
Ellie, could I ask somebody raise the question? And clearly, I've kind of jumped into Q&A. So Ellie, if you're okay staying out there, we're just getting some good questions and some are popping into my mind. Do you mind staying out there for a bit, Ellie?
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody was asking, does Whole Foods Urban Rivers, especially since the floating islands are right there? Or maybe you can just talk even more broadly, like there are a lot of businesses that line the Wild Mile. So what's the collaboration like between the organizations?
Yeah, so we do not partner with Whole Foods. They've been supportive of us installing the Wild Mile and the gardens that are out here now. We've been involved in a local day with them, and we've done a few tabling events at the Whole Foods that's right behind us. But for a while here, this was Urban Rivers headquarters before we recently got an office down on the Wild Mile, because we'd spend long days out here working, and this beautifully air-conditioned organic food market was right behind us. So so not formally, but they do support the project.
Are there any other businesses in that area or landowners that that you are trying to work with, or anything else that is worth sharing?
Yeah, so right across from us is Waste Management, this big white building, and we're working with them to bring some of our current islands over to their seawall, but also them funding their own kind of waste management islands that will be in addition to that across the way.
And while we're talking about waste management,
we also have a good relationship with REI. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's a little slow over here. Yeah, well, we also, so it's funny because the canal itself is kind of a patchwork of property owners and tenants. And so we do have to have good relationships with all of them. Part of the entry to this walkway section of the Wild Mile is right at the REI, the new REI building on Kingsbury. We've got a pretty good relationship with them as well. So it's one of those things that as the need develops, we're kind of roping more and more of these groups in. And everyone, for the most part, people kind of start to get it after a while. So whereas initially it was like, oh, you want to throw plants in the river and have them float there. That's kind of weird. And now that they kind of see it in person, it's like, oh yeah, we definitely want that. Let's get more and more of that for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because my understanding is that RI is also doing kayak rentals, and their dock is also publicly accessible. So if you happen to have your own kayak, you can access their dock. But they have a stake in the health of this area, because they want to help get kayakers out to recreate in the area. So it's definitely a space that a lot of folks have an interest in, and hopefully we'll all kind of work together towards progressing and improving the space. Somebody else in the chat asked, what kind of work does waste management do at that location? Is there a risk of pollution?
Really quickly before that, I also want to give a shout out to Kayak Chicago. They've been
please.
Wonderful partners with us. Previously we had run our ranger program out of Kayak Chicago, and they so graciously have supported us and given us the opportunity to have our volunteers, our River Ranger program, access all of their kayaks, as long as they were Urban Rivers volunteers helping with the maintenance and cleanup of the trash. This year, as we're easing back into things, we have 2 kayaks in our office that we're gonna start volunteers off using those. But as we're able to engage more people safely, definitely we'll be hosting trainings and leaving from Kayak Chicago. So they're also a great resource if you don't have a boat or kayak and want to get out on the river.
Ellie, thank you so much for mentioning them. And they're really just a little hop the wild mile. So it's easy to rent a kayak and go explore and work with Kayak Chicago as their outfitter over there.
It's right beyond that bridge. Right
yeah,
there.
like just around the river bend. While we're chatting and doing Q&A just for the last 10 minutes here, I put up the slide with the contact info for both of our organizations. So these are the easiest places to just send general inquiries about what you've heard tonight. So with Shed, we have the kayak@shedaquarium.org. And for Urban Rivers, it's team@urbanriv.org. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody has that accessible. But we still do have time for a couple more questions, and I saw a couple in the chat box, so I'll keep throwing those out. Again, somebody had asked about waste management, what exactly they do at that location. Like right there on Goose Island in the middle of the city, is there a risk of pollution?
That is a transfer station. So basically, everyone on the north side of Chicago has all of their garbage compiled there before they go take it out to landfills. They now know that they're going to be there for a little while. So they've done things like put in air scrubbers to make it stink a little less. So we do get a reasonable amount of stink. I don't know if I'd call that pollution per se, but it definitely there's a constant battle between the baked breads and cookie smell of Whole Foods versus the garbagey smell of waste management, which is not necessarily that bad. The biggest one that they have is we get a lot of wind-blown trash that ends up in the canal, but you can't really say it's from them because plenty of times the stuff that we find in there are definitely Whole Foods branded or things that people just end up throwing in. So I actually don't think that they're disproportionately putting in more trash into the river because I think that they have that whole building built there just to make sure that the trash stays in one place. So I would say that a lot of the trash that we probably get is almost certainly people who are walking along the riverfront who are improperly disposing of whatever they're using. We find a whole lot of beer cans. We find a whole lot of straws and cups and cafe cups and things like that, which seems much more like something that's probably blowing over from the fact that we have more people experiencing the river. So yeah, there is a concern. I mean, there's pollution wherever humans go, and so it's one of those things that's just going to be a constant issue for us, and we're just going to constantly deal with it. It's also one of the things that the river rangers do best, is go out there and deal with all the crap so no one else has to.
Bill, thanks for that. And I think you kind of touched on this, but Lauren had asked what kind of measures you're taking to prevent damage to the islands, especially as they're more heavily trafficked. I don't know if you have anything additional or if you kind of already hit on that.
Oh no, that's definitely a concern of ours as well, and less so due to kayakers and the small personal craft that aren't motorized. It's we run our boat into our little trolling motor powered boat into them all the time, and they can take a certain amount of wear and tear, I guess you'd call it, because they're designed to do that. The thing I think that is a much bigger risk for us are the boats that can still make it into the canal. The canal is pretty shallow, but you have larger motorized pontoon boats and other recreational craft that do probably pose a reasonable risk, and especially because the people driving those boats tend to be a little, you're relaxed, you're having a couple beers, it's a nice day out, you're hanging out with your friends, maybe not paying attention to so much. That would be the bigger risk for sure. And there's really nothing that we can do necessarily about that besides make sure that the design is as sound as possible and just keep a regular eye on it, which is again why the rangers are so important, because we can't be out there all the time, but we can always have volunteers that are out there making sure that if something does happen, we know about it right away and can deal with it quickly.
And we also have, we've put these decking boards. I don't know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen right now? We have these decking boards that we've put on the islands, so it's easier for our volunteers once we are able to bring people out here to walk along the islands without sinking them or, getting dunked in the river water.
Well, one thing that for our last few minutes, I want to talk about some other ways that people can get involved in all of this work. And one thing that you're reminding me of is from our knowledge about conservation stewardship in general, SHED does a lot of beach cleanups, on the Lake Michigan shoreline, Chicago River. We do invasive removal around forest preserves. But what we know is that when people see other people taking care of a natural space, they're more likely to be respectful of it. A beach that is littered with garbage, people are more likely to add to that and disrespect that space. So even all of us just being out and having a presence between river rangers and kayak for conservation and just other people recreating and spending time in the area, it helps with a psyche and an understanding that the space is to be respected and cared for. So as far as trying to have like ambassadors or cops keeping pontoon boats from running into the islands, it might be a little bit tricky, but also the more presence we have out there, the less likely, hopefully, things like that are to happen, or that people are less likely to drop litter in the area and in the river. So again, though, back to the importance of contributing to stewardship and caring for these spaces. We've talked about river rangers and kayak for conservation as ways to get involved. I had dropped in the chat that if you're interested in doing a self-led litter cleanup for the Chicago River this year, Friends of the Chicago River has a program called the Summer Challenge. So if you even just, I dropped the link in there, but if you just Google Friends of the Chicago River Summer Challenge, due to COVID, we're not doing a lot of big volunteer events. And so that's why Friends put this out as an opportunity for you to grab a few people from your household to do some cleaning up of the river and still make an impact. I have been hearing about some cuts from different parks or the city level that some of these, some basic maintenance may be cut back a bit this year. So it's even more important for volunteers like all of you to come out and join us for that. Or I shouldn't say join us, because really I meant, taking it upon yourself and doing your own volunteer work. Somebody had also asked about whether we will be looking for volunteers for planting days. And I wonder if, Phil, if that's something that you wanted to talk about, because I know SHED and Urban Rivers are just starting to talk about what our installation and our planting day will look like for later in the summer. But do you have a response to that, or is it TBD based on COVID restrictions or anything like that?
Oh, we are 100% going to need people to help us install. We might have to do something depending on the health guidance at that point. We might have to break it up over, a couple hours during the day or what have you. But no matter what, we've got, 200 more platforms coming in that are going to harbor 6,000 plants. So we absolutely are going to need help with that. And we will definitely, especially anyone who signs up as a river ranger, we're going to let you know well ahead of time. I think our projected date for those is still August or maybe mid-August. But we're definitely going to need a lot of volunteers. The method by which might change here or there, but definitely anybody who's interested, especially around August, we're definitely going to be looking for people to help us get all those plants in the new islands in.
So the best way for them to get connected is either to potentially join as a river ranger or even just to email you guys and express interest in being part of the planting day?
You got it. If you are someone who has somewhat regular availability, meaning that, maybe once every 2 weeks or so, you're able to come out and help us out in various activities, then go onto our website and sign up as a ranger. If you're someone who just maybe has the 1 or 2 weekends in August that can help, that's good too. Just contact us at Team at Urban Riv, and we'll be able to let you guys know when we're available. Even if you just want updates, it doesn't hurt to sign up as a river ranger. We'll send you those regularly either way. So I would direct everyone probably to our website, sign up. It's pretty quick, and we will definitely let you guys know when we have those needs.
So guys, with our final moments here, I'm going to move towards wrapping up, but if any of our speakers have anything else that they want to share, feel free to wave me down and I'll loop you in. But we covered a lot today. It was a fun time. I'm glad our field trip out to the river worked out. And Ellie, you look great out there in this, summer, beautiful evening light. So I hope that a lot of you folks will join us out on the Chicago River. Lots of ways to get involved. And I think about all the things that you can see. Of course, the wildlife that Jackie mentioned, herons, fish. Austin, look out for those glow sticks. If you happen to be out there in the evening, it's not exciting like bioluminescence. It's just Austin having his his own Chicago raver, as I've been calling it. Phil, with so many research projects and different plants that you guys are installing out there, I can't wait to see how things continue to develop. And one thing that I love about exploring the Wild Mile is that it looks different throughout the whole season. So right now, when Ellie was showing us the islands, they're super green and lush. And in the coming months, we're going to get to see everything flower and see different types of animals come during that time, different pollinators. And that's one of the studies that we're doing through the Kayak for Conservation program too, is pollinator and invertebrate sampling. So it's kind of fun to see how that changes. But with that, thank you again to everybody for joining us. I hope you learned something new or got a refresher of what's going on the Wild Mile. We are considering doing this as a recurring event. So if you have any insight or motivation as far as how we can make this better, or if you'd like to see us give updates or have different guest speakers who from folks working in the Wild Mile or the Chicago River, please feel free to reach out to either of these email addresses and share your thoughts. And we would be happy to host something like this again. Last year we did it at a brewery. We're happy to do it virtually right now. And we'll see what we can do again in the future. So with that, thank you again for joining everybody. And we will be signing off here in just a moment. Hope you guys have a good night.